With all this COVID-19 shamozzle going on, the government has allowed people to access 20,000 of their super if they have been financially affected by the coronavirus. Now, I am starting to hear people flirt with the idea of using this 20,000 as a deposit for their first home. So today I want to explore this idea, so let's jump into it. First and foremost, guys, I just want to put it out there, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Do not take my advice. Do not listen to this video. It is purely for entertainment purposes only and might get you thinking, but do seek independent financial advice before taking into account anything in this video. So now that we've got that covered off, let's jump into it, guys. So a lot of people are starting to flirt with the idea of using the 20,000 that they can access out of their super as their first home deposit. And to look at this idea, I really want to look at the opportunity cost of leaving that 20,000 in your super and the annual growth that that would receive over time versus pulling it out now and buying a home, and have a look at what you'd be better off financially in the long run looking into the future if you did go through one scenario or the other. So historically, the Australian Stock Exchange has returned around 9% per annum historically. So that's basically since its inception, each year it returns around 9%. Now, to really look at this and to break it down, you need to take into account a compound interest. So that's the idea that each year the growth compounds on itself. So if you've got 10% growth on $10, after the year one, you'll have $11. Another 10%, you'll actually earn $1.10 in interest. And each year, the amount of interest that you are earning goes up and up over time. So to really delve into it, I've brought along some friends today, Mr. Skittles. Now, each Skittle here represents $10,000. So if you were to pull 20,000 out of your super, let's say you would be essentially pulling out 2 Skittles. To give that some sort of comparison, if you were to leave that money in your superannuation fund and it received a 9%, so the historical growth rate, over say, let's call it a 30-year period, how many Skittles would you actually end up with? And the answer is 265. So that is, if you did take your $20,000 out of the stock exchange, it would be the equivalent of taking 265,000 off the future self. So essentially, the 20,000 that you pull out today is worth 265,000 into the future. So that's a really sort of interesting point if you're looking at pulling super out to buy a car, buy a motorbike, buy a boat. You are essentially taking 265,000 off yourself into the future. So keep that in mind if you are withdrawing your super as to what that opportunity cost is. However, as today's topic, if you're pulling that 20,000 out today, is it a good idea to be buying a house with that money? So at the moment, since the start of January, the Australian government put into place the new first homeowners scheme, which essentially allows you to buy a property with as little as a 5% deposit. So for 20,000, you can actually buy a $400,000 house. So that's going to be the premise of this comparison. So using the 20,000 in your super to buy a $400,000 house, what does that leave you in 30 years? And is it in a better position than if you just left those funds in your superannuation? So most $400,000 houses pretty much rent for around $400 per week. And a $400,000 house at the moment, with where interest rates are, to repay off over 30 years will also cost you around $400. So the rent versus ownership costs per week really are pretty much the same at the moment. And that's good news as a first home buyer or a property owner, knowing that to repay your property really does cost the same amount as to rent it. So putting the 20,000 into that property today, if you paid that property off over 30 years, it will effectively cost you around $400 per week by the time you take into council rates and inflation. But at the end of the 30 years, you will own a $400,000 asset outright, and that's not taking into consideration any growth in property prices. That's just if that $400,000 price remain the same. So instantly we can see that by buying your first home and paying it off over 30 years, you're financially a lot better off than if you were to leave that money in super, as we're talking 400,000 versus 265,000. Keeping in mind that you will always have to pay rent if you leave the money in the stock exchange in super versus buying that first property. The other thing to take into consideration, which I think is a massive factor, is the home security factor. Do you really want to be 80 and still renting and having to shift properties, where that option to own and have that property paid outright, not have to pay any rent into retirement, certainly is a very appealing one. So there you have it, guys. That gives you a bit of an idea of the true cost of pulling out $20,000 today versus what happens if you went and bought a property with that. So as I said, guys, not financial advice, but purely some thoughts to get you thinking. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you do have any questions, always feel free to shoot me a message. I'd love to help.